Josh, I remember early on, it felt like we were on together every other week when we were going over the feast days. And then we completed that series, and it's about once a year. And I miss these a little bit, man.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Uh, Life has gotten busier since then. I mean, that was a
I
few
know.
years ago. I've got several more children since then, and they're starting to get married, and so there's a lot of things on my plate, and then of course you moved away, and so
I did. I did.
yeah,
I did.
can't
I
just
moved to
ride my bike
Missouri.
down the street anymore and go play at Dave's house.
Complete with this old missionary name tag. Um,
Yeah, right. So
no, yeah, no, it was, yeah, when they start getting married, that's a different feeling, right? Like, I remember when my oldest boy got married, there was this old guy in the ward we were going to, and he came down, he sat next to me, and he goes, "Well, you get to find out here in about another 2 years if you were a good parent or not. Let me know how it turns out for you," and walks away. But no, it's a different feeling when they start getting married and having kids of their own. Um,
yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. My father-in-law says, that someone was a good parent, speaking it, speaking as a Latter-day Saint. Someone was a good Latter-day Saint if their grandchildren are Latter-day Saints.
there you go.
That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the way, because the force of tradition and stuff can carry on for a generation, but you didn't really pass
right.
things along. You didn't really pass along your values
It's gonna
if
show.
if they don't show up in the following generation. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it'll
we'll find
show.
out.
Yep, absolutely. Well, dude, I'm excited for this one. We're gonna dive back into one of these uncanonized revelations. And
Yeah.
for anybody who has not got, yes, one of those, you need to go get one of those, even if you're LDS, because here's what I'm going to tell you is that there's a ton in there that you don't normally have. You have the lectures on faith. They're back in that book. Then you have a bunch of historical context that's given. Drew's real good about explaining his work, why he did what he did, why he held to what he did. And then also you're going to get these 125 unpublished revelations, uncanonized revelations. And there is
Right.
so much in there. And look, I wouldn't like if you're in the LDS church and you're trying to keep it low key, don't take it to church with you, but you're going to want to have that thing in your library anyway. So that's my plug for it. I just can't say enough good things about what Drew's done here.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty remarkable. Um, a remarkable compilation, and just full of tons of historical information. A very like a necessary study companion for anyone who wants to really kind of understand the revelatory heritage, I guess, that we have to that we've been blessed with. So,
Absolutely.
wait,
So which one are we into today?
okay, I was going to look at Joseph Smith 4.
Okay.
Okay, so this is on page 496, and this is kind of a controversial one, and I'm actually going to tie this to presentation that I gave. Uh, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something, um, dealing with race and lineage and inheritance, in Israel. Okay,
Hmm.
and of course, Mormonism has a lot of interesting history regarding race, and we don't have time to kind of delve into all of those things, um, nor do I even know all of those things. There's so much; it's such a huge topic. There's been so much research done on it. But I do want to kind of talk about the not so much the historical, but the scriptural, as far as I see it, the scriptural kind of underpinnings of the items just that are kind of related to this idea of intermarriage and racial or lineal things in Mormonism. So
Yeah.
Okay.
So in full disclosure, I did this very same revelation with Elior already, but
Oh, is that right?
he glossed over that part, right? He's like, I don't want to get into that, right? That wasn't the thrust of his message.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
kind of thought at some point I was going to have to go back and do this. And then when I called you and asked you and you said which one, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is good because we're going to hit that other part that we need to
Okay,
hit.
interesting. Has that other episode with Elior already aired?
Oh, yeah, it aired like 6 weeks ago.
Oh gosh, I missed it somehow. So
It's all
okay, so
right.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to get right into the pertinent part then. So this is according to the numbering, the versification here in the RV. Is verse 7 and 8 that we're interested in. So, do you have it in front of you?
I do. You want me to read it?
Yeah, go for it.
Verily I say unto you that the wisdom of man in his fallen state knoweth not the purposes and the privileges of my holy priesthood. But ye shall know when ye receive a fullness by reason of anointing. For it is my will that in time ye should take unto you wives of the Lamanites and Nephites, that their posterity may become white, delightsome, and just, for even now their families are more virtuous than the Gentiles.
They're females.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Um, nice. So yeah, so it's interesting that this is quite a late source. This
Mm-hmm.
is the source of this is W. Phelps, William Wines Phelps. He wrote a letter to Brigham Young in August 12th, 1861. And in this letter, he says that this revelation was communicated to him and a few other men on the 17th of July, 1831. So 30 years previous. And this seems to be one of, if not the earliest revelation relating to plural marriage. Although plural marriage is not mentioned directly, um, Phelps later on he said he asked Joseph Smith for some clarification about this because it says to marry the Lamanite and Nephite women, and he says, how can we do that because we're already married? And reportedly Joseph says, in the same manner Abraham took Hagar and Keturah and Jacob Rachel Bilhah and Zilpah by revelation. Okay. um, so so that's pretty early, 1831. And a lot of kind of critics, I guess, will kind of poo-poo this idea, saying, "Oh, it's so late, it's ridiculous," and he, just remembers from off the top of his head something 30 years ago. And they have fair points there, but it is interesting that Ezra Booth, who was a member of the church, but he was a pretty influential apostate. So there is that. But just a few months after this, so December 8th, 1831, he wrote a letter to the Ohio Star newspaper in which he refers to, quote, a revelation that the Mormon elders form matrimonial alliance with the natives. So,
Mm,
and we have other reminiscences, and again, these are all late, but they do corroborate um, from some other folks saying that Joseph Smith received his first revelations about plural marriage as early as 1831. So,
right.
okay. So it's interesting because, um, the Lamanites, and it mentions the Nephites too, but of course, you read the Book of Mormon history, you know that the Nephites are basically wiped out, although civilizations never really get totally wiped out. What happens is they get absorbed, right,
Right.
into the conquering population. That's normally, historically how things happen. So it mentions Lamanites and Nephites here. And
Right.
the purpose here says that you should marry them basically to, it says to make them white, delightsome, and just. And and says that they're virtuous, more virtuous than many of the Gentile women. So there's something about like removing curses, okay, and and we don't need to go into details about the curses necessarily here. That's not what I want to talk about. But it is interesting that it says that that these Latter-day Saint men should marry the Lamanite women. And it's interesting to me that it doesn't say that they should give their daughters to Lamanite men.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it seems like that would like let's just if we're gonna intermarry, why don't we just like go both ways, and that'll just kind of speed up the process.
I see what you're saying.
Okay, so I think the reason for that, and I'm going to get to that. I'm going to build a case for why I think that is. But um, first of all, we need to talk a little bit about um, inheritance and like God's plans, I guess. We know that in Latter-day Saints conceptions, exaltation is a family matter, but
Right.
salvation is absolutely an individual matter. Okay, at least by some we kind of are sloppy with our language sometimes, and we use salvation to mean multiple things. But I'm going to quote here from section 132, verse 17. Says, "For these angels did not abide by law, therefore they cannot be enlarged, but remain separately and singly without exaltation in their saved condition to all
Mm-hmm.
eternity. And from henceforth are not gods, but are angels of God forever and ever." So single people are recipients of salvation, but not exaltation. This is what section 132 is
Correct.
saying there.
And
So we go
can I
ahead.
just say something about that real quick? Because I think you're bringing up a real good point here in terms of not being sloppy with our language. Okay. When we talk with a Protestant or something like that, they're going to ask us if we've been saved. That will not mean the same thing to you as it does to them.
Right.
And it's going to be super important that you understand that salvation is the free gift that Christ gave to everybody. Unless you're a son of perdition, you're coming back, right? You're going to get a
Yeah.
body, you're going somewhere. Exaltation is a different matter. And it's important to realize that when you're talking with different groups that they don't even recognize exaltation as a thing. So you got to be precise with that language because it does mean different things.
Yeah. I my kids think it's funny sometimes because I taught them this principle that a lot of other religions they kind of they kind of believe that only their adherents are going to heaven, and everyone else is going to hell, whatever in one form or another. Mormonism is unique because we believe everyone's going to heaven. The only people going to hell are members of our group.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So
100% correct.
kind of flip that around, but yeah, Mormons are nearly universalists, in some sense, right? So, but but families are divinely ordained, and God created man in His image, male and female, and married them. That means that means that God created families in His image as well. And so when we keep track of families, we do that a lot of times. We talk about our pedigree.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Pedigree comes from is a French term. It means foot of the crane. The crane's
Right.
foot like splits, so you're have too many fingers. But
I know what you're saying. Yep.
yeah, but if your pedigree gets really big, then it doesn't look like a crane's foot anymore. It looks like a tree, and so we call it a family tree, right? And this idea of a tree representing God's family is throughout the scriptures. Um, you know, it's a very persistent. metaphor, or like metaphor, that God is this gardener and mankind is his vineyard. So, we have things like in Exodus chapter 15, it says, talking to talking to about the children of Israel, that thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance. So the people are going to be planted. In Isaiah, these are just a few examples I picked out. And Isaiah says, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plants. Okay. Psalms talk about this frequently. Psalm 80 verses 8 and 9 says that God brought a vine out of Egypt and planted it right in the Holy Land. And it did take deep root and filled the land. Okay. In the New Testament also, we have, Paul, his epistle to the Romans, chapter 11 says, if thou, being a wild olive tree, talking about the Gentiles, were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. And then, of course, in the Book of Mormon, we have the largest and most expansive metaphor, allegory of Zenos, talking about the wild and the tame olive trees. Okay, and I don't need to go over that. We're familiar with that. But basically, in order to be saved, you need to be part of this tree, which is a family tree. To be exalted, rather. Be exalted, you need to be, so that the fullness of salvation, sometimes we might say, you need to be part of this tree, this family tree, which is also called Israel. And even cursings are put in these arboreal terms. Okay, Malachi chapter 1 says, the day shall come, burn them as an oven. The proud and the wicked, they shall be stubble. And that, they will be left with neither root nor branch. So they'll just be like this stump, a disconnected stump. That is a term of damnation. So, interestingly too, we have the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is very keen on this. It says, like, the Book of Mormon people knew that they were a branch broken off from the house of Israel. And it's interesting just considering that, because it helps us to understand what exactly the family is that we're trying to get into and be a part of, and how that is managed. So, the Nephites, they were, for centuries, thousands of years even, or 1,000 years roughly, separated entirely from the branch of Israel that was, or like the main body, I guess you could say, that was growing in Jerusalem. And yet they were both totally God's people, totally God's family. And the, Lehi and Jeremiah, as far as we know, according to Joseph Smith, like, they had the Melchizedek priesthood, and they had all of the keys necessary to administer the church and all the ordinances and whatever. Okay. But these things were happening concurrently. And so that's a little bit tricky to make sense of when we think of what Doctrine and Covenants section 132 talks about, one on the earth. No, there's never, but let's see, I should just read it. Section 132. Sorry, I got to turn to it here.
Oh, you're good. You need to share your screen. Let me know. I think I gave you permissions already.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have my computer I have will not allow me that right now.
You're fine. You're good.
Okay. Okay. So, verse 7. Verse 7's long. All of the covenants, contracts, bonds, etc., not entered into, okay, and sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise by him who was anointed for time and eternity. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit. Through the medium of mine anointed, whom I have appointed on the earth to hold his power. And Joseph Smith is the one that I've appointed in the last days. And then it says, and there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and keys of this priesthood is conferred. And so if it's not done by the Holy Spirit of promise and sealed, then they are of no efficacy, virtue, or force. So it's interesting. It says that there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and keys of the priesthood is conferred. And according to, I would say, the prevalent interpretations of this, it makes it very difficult to understand how Lehi and Jeremiah are operating independently. And you might say, well, that was
Peter
back
and
then.
Nephi.
They didn't have telecommunications, so they could correlate their meetings or whatever. But the scripture says never, never but one on the earth at a time. And, and I read that forwards and backwards, that this is always the way that God has operated. So it becomes difficult to understand that. But anyway, and I don't want to get off on too far of a tangent here, but it doesn't say there's never but one on the earth who holds the keys. It says there's never but one on the earth at a time on whom these things are conferred. So in other words, they're conferred singly, individually, one at a time. Not that they are held individually, but we read held because of our tradition. So anyway, the thing that I want to point out there is that when we have this, when the church, or the God's family is likened to a tree, trees have this interesting property of self-similarity. They are fractal in their geometry, right? And so self-similarity or fractals, it means if I take a branch of the tree and cut it off and separate it from the rest of the tree, and I planted that limb in the ground, and you just looked at it and you didn't realize that I cut it off from the main tree, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was just a branch, because the branch looks like the tree, just a smaller version of the whole thing. And this happens there's a lot of interesting fractal things there, but the church is like that. The branches of the tree are like that. And so it's easy to think, if you're in the church and you look around and you see the tree, so to speak, to think that it's the whole tree and not just a branch. And that's because all the branches look like the whole.
Yep.
And that's just the nature of trees. So, okay. And we're getting to the point here. So, so how do we grow trees? How do trees get bigger? Well, there's really only two ways. And this is the same way that the church gets bigger. Or that any family gets bigger. Like the way that the church gets bigger, or the tree and the families get bigger, is the same. One is by birth. Okay. So for a tree, that would be equated to natural growth. The tree puts out sprouts. Okay. So families in the house of Israel, they have children, and those children, marry other Israelites and have more children, and the tree grows and branches that way. And the other way that trees can grow, and families as well, is by grafting. Right? We take a branch from some other tree, which is a different family, and we graft it into the tree that we're interested in. Okay, so in a gospel sense, we would call that sealing. So you can grow the church or grow the tree by being born or by being sealed into the tree. Okay, and there's really two kinds of sealing. There is by marriage. There's marriage sealing and adoption sealing. And marriage sealing is I contest that marriage sealing is for women, and adoption is for men. So I'll get more into detail.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going to need an explanation there, because I'm fascinated by this concept.
Okay. So Abraham is the key. to so many things. And in Genesis 12, and there's some other places too, God gives this promise to Abraham. I'm going to read it here. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curse thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Okay, so I want to focus on that last clause there. In thee, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So I mentioned this promise is repeated, and so that was Genesis 12, but in Genesis 18, the Lord says that all the nations of the earth will be blessed rather than the families of the earth. And then in chapter 22 says that in Abraham's descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So slight variations there, but kind of the same idea. So the shall be blessed is an interesting Hebrew word. It's v'nivrechu, and in v'nivrechu there is in Hebrew B and V are the same letter actually, kind of similar to Spanish. How B and if you know any Spanish, B and V are related. So in Hebrew they are as well. And in this word v'nivrechu there is the root word of that is barach. It's B or V, and then an R, and then a K, like a kind of a hard K. And this word barach literally means knee, like the connection between your lower and upper leg.
Okay.
Okay. And so in Hebrew, the word knee is an idiom for blessing, which is a little bit weird. Okay. But why would the word knee be connected to blessing? Because sometimes you could imagine this a couple of ways. If you appear before a king, what you're going to do is you're going to kneel before him, and then you're going to pronounce some kind of blessing. O King, live forever, or may your domain spread, or whatever. But you take a knee in order to pronounce this blessing. Or if it's the other way around, you can think of a father taking his child upon his knee in order to give him a blessing.
I see.
So, so this is kind of the source of this idiomatic use of barach as a Hebrew word for knee, also to mean blessing. So if we go back to Genesis 12, and when we read it kind of literally, it could say, "In thee, Abraham, all the families of the earth shall be kneed." Okay, and that's kind of a of course it's an idiom. Idioms don't make sense unless you understand
Right.
what they're referring to. But I will say here's the connection. It is because barach is also an agricultural term. So if I have a tree and I graft another branch into it, this graft, you can see that it makes like there's a knee right there, and the graft is called barach. Or it uses the word, the Hebrew word is a derivative of knee, which also means blessed. Okay, so and we have there's famous rabbinical commentary on this. I'll tell you one. This guy's his name's Rashbam. He was pretty famous rabbinical author. He lived around like 1100 AD, around that time. His commentary on Genesis 12:2 says, when the Lord says, "will be blessed," that this is a term of grafting. That is to say, the families of the earth will be mixed in with your family. That is how the families of the earth will be blessed. They'll become blessed because they'll become part of Abraham's family tree.
Okay.
I should pour myself a little water here.
No, you're good. Okay. So basically, they're saying that the way that Abraham will be a blessing to the nations is by all these other nations coming into Abraham's family.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, yeah, that's right. And you could understand this in other ways, and there are other ways to understand this, but this kind of agricultural metaphor is one of the legitimate ways of understanding this Hebraic speech here. So we could literally read Genesis 12:3 to say, in thee, Abraham, all the families of the earth shall be grafted.
Okay.
And the amazing thing about this is, it's like, okay, that's Genesis, and you're looking at like rabbinical commentary, and so how valid is that? Well, we have our own Book of Abraham, and
We do.
yeah, and that sheds some more light on it. And guess what Abraham says? Abraham says that Rashbam's interpretation of Genesis 12:3 is correct.
Are
Okay.
you talking about Abraham 2 starting in about 10?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yep. So
Should we read that real quick?
yeah, you got it.
Okay.
So let's start at verse 8. Actually, we're going to read 8 to 11, and you can
Yep,
see that
I can do that.
this overlaps with Genesis 12. This is the same promise.
Yep.
This is
Yep.
the same promise that Genesis 12 is talking about, but with some more elaboration. So go ahead.
Okay. Because I'm going to have a follow-up question after I read this, all right?
Okay, let's hear it.
My name is Jehovah, and I know the end from the beginning. Therefore, my hand shall be over thee, and I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee above measure, and make thy name great among all nations. And thou shalt be a blessing unto thy seed after thee, that in their hands they shall bear the ministry and priesthood unto all nations. And I will bless them through thy name. For as many as receive this gospel shall be called after thy name, and shall be accounted thy seed, and shall rise up and bless thee as unto their father.
Can
And
you
I will
pause right there
bless,
for just a minute?
yeah,
Just pause right there. I'm going to have you keep reading, but I just wanted to point out that it says, as many as receive this gospel shall be called after thy name. It shall be counted thy seed and call you their father. This is talking about joining Abraham's family.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee, that is, in thy priesthood, and in thy seed, that is thy priesthood, for I give unto thee a promise, that this right shall continue in thee, and in thy seed after thee. That is to say, the literal seed, or the seed of the body. Shall all the families of the earth be blessed, even with the blessing of the gospel, which are the blessings of salvation, even unto eternal life. Even of an eternal life, excuse me. Okay, so here's my question. I get that adoption's a big thing. I I I totally believe that with my whole heart. But we have to contend with this, right? Because it does kind of point out how you become Abraham's seed, right? And that is by accepting the gospel.
Yeah.
So if that's what we're aiming for, why would we need to go any further? And if I'm moving too far ahead and you're going to cover this later, just let me know and I can shelve it.
Yeah. Well, um, the gospel is, well, okay. This is what I'll say. The gospel is a big term.
Right. It is.
Okay. I think it is useful oftentimes to it is useful for us to split the gospel into kind of temporal and spiritual spheres. However, the Lord has said, all the things nothing that I do is temporal. Everything is spiritual, but but it still is kind of a useful way for us to think about things as to dividing them into earthly and heavenly, or temporal and spiritual kinds of things. And and all, we separate that into Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthood functions and duties as well. Like Aaronic priesthood, is dealing with temporal things, and Melchizedek is dealing with spiritual heavenly things. And the Aaronic rites are to, and I'm going back to Old Testament stuff even here. Well, I don't get into a lot of detail here, but I'll just say, without further qualification, the Aaronic rites, the animal sacrifices, and even baptism, on all of those things, they are to make us and the land and the temple and the people clean, so that the presence of God can dwell with us on earth. The Melchizedek rites are actually to cleanse us so that we can ascend into heaven. So the Aaronic is to bring heaven down to us, and the Melchizedek is to bring us up to heaven. Okay, that's kind of the way I conceptualize it. Okay, so if the temporal side of things, though, we often forget the temporal side, like the Aaronic things, that is part of the gospel, and that is not a part of the gospel for most of Christianity, I will say, but it is for Mormonism. We are interested in the land. We are interested in building cities. We are interested in having inheritances, right, and promised land, and building communities together, not just being saved and going up as individuals to praise God, around the throne as angels or something. That's part of it, praising God around the throne, but but okay, so this, and we are jumping ahead a little bit, but I'll mention it here now. Like, being part of Israel is not just that you've been baptized and you are expecting to have a place in heaven. Being part of Israel means you get a piece of the promised land. That means, and so we're talking about like physical inheritance. So, right. So who do you inherit from? Well, according to the scriptures, we inherit from our fathers. Okay. So I would say that being accepting the gospel, if we say accepting the gospel means just getting baptized, I would say that's not quite enough to that's a good start, but, and this is maybe a bit controversial, but I think that full acceptance of the gospel, full acceptance of, like, as an identity, being part of the house of Israel, includes being part of a family. Now, it is true that we are looking forward to the day when Zion will be established, and when the one mighty and strong will come and divide by lot the inheritances to the saints. Okay, so when it comes time when that has actually happened, or you could just think about, if you want to think about in ancient Israel, that's fine. Like the Old Testament allows for converts, but the land was portioned up between all the tribes, and then within each tribe it was portioned up between all the the heads of households, basically, and then sons would inherit pieces of their father's land or whatever. So if you're an outsider, you're a Babylonian or a Greek man, okay, whatever, you're from Egypt, and you realize that worshiping the Egyptian gods is not doing it for you, and you realize that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the true God, and you come to the land of Israel and say, I want to join up, um, well, where are you going to live? Like, uh, are you just going to take someone's land
See
and
what you're saying.
say this is now this I'm just going to cordon off a part of someone's land that looks good to me, and I'm going to take it for mine? No way.
Mhm.
You have to be adopted into a family so that you can inherit a piece of the land, and that's a part of the inheritance, is like a physical um, reception of land, and other things too. But that's a big part of it. So so I think that this fullness, I'll say the fullness of receiving the gospel, is actually to be adopted, so that it's not just spiritual blessings, but actual physical blessings as well, like receiving a piece of the promised land by inheritance.
Okay. So again, I honestly, I'm not trying to be a butt, but there's something else I'm thinking of. If patriarchal blessings are a true thing, doesn't that tell us what tribe we belong to?
Yeah.
But that
Yep.
would only be spiritually as far as you would extrapolate. And then for a for like a those physical inheritances in Zion, if you will, right?
Yeah.
When the Lord comes, or the one mighty and strong comes, however you prefer to look at it, and divides up those inheritances, that's where the adoption comes into play.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
guess I
Absolutely.
guess you'd have to understand the fractal nature of ancient, if the model is ancient Israel, right? Which
Yeah.
is what I think I'm getting put down here. There's kind of three separate times you have to enter a family, so to speak. And follow me out here if this is making
Okay.
sense. So your contention would be then, by accepting the gospel, yes, you are part of Abraham's greater household, but you're not Abraham's kid, so to speak, right? And so then you're pronounced through your patriarchal blessing the house of I don't know, Ephraim, right? But
Yeah.
look, not all the poor inheritance that was divvied out went to just that guy named Ephraim, right? There were his children and his children's children, and on down through the line. So at some point, being sealed back into a living priesthood line assures not just the physical blessings, but also the eternal ones as well. Is that kind of what you're
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah. I think so. I think that's a pretty good summary.
Okay.
Yep. So I think um, yeah, I was going to say something else, but I think you said it pretty well there. So now,
I'll
of
write
course,
that
this
down because
hasn't
it doesn't happen often, Josh. So let's make note of that.
the actual inheritances in the promised land. Those have not been, you know, given yet. Like that's something we're looking forward to. So some of this stuff is going to have to be kind of ironed out. But when the early saints practiced um, the law of adoption, they thought of it in a very similar way.
Mhm.
And I don't have the quotes in front of me, but it's, they thought that it was basically like the 12 apostles are like 12 new tribes and people, and that the land is going to be, when Zion is established and the one mighty and strong, divides the inheritance, it's going to be, divided according to tribes again. And depending on where you are linked in is where your lot is going to be cast, for the piece of land that you are going to inherit as part of the new Zion, New Jerusalem, all of that. so there are things that we are looking forward to being fulfilled. But to kind of understand and conceptualize these things, we can also just imagine or think about how this would be done in ancient times. Like I said, there's an Egyptian who comes up, or a Greek who comes over to Israel and says, "Hey, I want to join." And they're like, "Well, we're gonna have some missionary discussions. Okay, you're gonna we're gonna teach you about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what He expects, and teach you the commandments, and whatever. And you're gonna get circumcised probably, and you're gonna get baptized, and then we want to give you a piece of land, but whose land are you gonna get? Well, uh, really, the conversion has to be complete, and then you would have to basically impress some Israelite man to adopt you as a son, so that you could inherit."
And do we know that that's actually how it went in ancient Israel?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's how it went. Now, if you're a woman, if you're a foreigner who was a woman, then and you wanted to join, then what you do is you'd impress some Israelite man to take you as a wife,
Right.
and
And
then
then
you would
you're in his household. Yeah.
and then you would inherit from your husband. So men inherit from their fathers, and women inherit from their husbands, or with their
Yeah.
husbands. That's how that's how the inheritance rules have always been. So, um, so this the fact that all that the other nations will be blessed by being grafted into Israel's family tells us that there are other trees. Okay, there are other trees out there. So, um, and let's see, where do I want to go? I think I want to go to there are other trees, and if you look at some of the things that have been taught, or like our understanding of things that have been taught relating to um, intermarriage and race and priesthood and things like that, there are some real problems with the scriptures.
Uh-huh.
Okay, because there's a lot of what I call problematic people. Okay, so I'm going to name some problematic people here, like people who are in the genealogy of Jesus.
I was going to say I'm fairly certain I'm in somebody's contacts with exact title.
Problematic person. Yeah,
Problematic person. Yeah.
no doubt.
Sorry. Go ahead. So okay. So there's problematic people in the Bible.
Yeah. So one of the very first one I think is Egyptus. The original version of the Book of Abraham calls her Zepta, and her daughter was Egyptus. And I think there's actually a Scrabble error there, but regardless, um, Ham marries Zepta or Egyptus, and the Book of Moses chapter 8 says Noah and his sons hearkened to the Lord and gave heed, and they were called the sons of God. So Ham marrying Egyptus doesn't seem to cause a problem, or any barrier to Ham being called son of God, and that's quite a title.
That's
Um,
actually a real good point, right? Because had that been the problem, why didn't Ham just get left off the boat?
right? Yes. If Ham was just depraved, disqualified, worthy of death, um, then yeah, he would just got left off the boat. He and his wife, right? But yeah, later on in chapter 8 of Moses, says Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, for Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation, and he walked with God, as did also his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Like,
Okay. All right.
okay, so I'm going to kind of go through some of these problematic people, and there's things that we could say. Let me just go through them, I guess. So the next one we have is Hagar.
Mhm.
Okay, so one of Abraham's wives. She's the mother of Ishmael, and she is Egyptian. And she's Egyptian. That's not debated. But in our own book of Abraham, chapter 1, it says all the Egyptians were descendants of Ham and had partaken in the blood of the Canaanites. Okay, so that they had partaken there. Although this is not the scripture, I'm just parenthetical statement here. The Egyptians were principally descended from Mitzrayim, which is another one of Ham's sons. Okay, but in Abraham it said that they had partaken in the blood of the Canaanites, so there was some intermixture there. So,
Josh,
but
can I bring up a question real quick
yeah,
about Hagar? Because and you might be the guy to know this a little bit better than I do. There was some debate that about the time that Hagar would have been around as an Egyptian, that the Hyksos, I believe it was the Hyksos. Don't quote me on that, but
Hyksos,
the Hyksos had taken over, who were a fairer complected
yeah,
group, right? And they came in and kind of seized Egypt, and they were in control. So there's this thing of, well, she wasn't that kind of Egyptian. She was the other kind of Egyptian.
right,
Is there any insight you have there on that at all?
yeah. I'm actually going to say so for all of these problematic people. There is a whole bunch of apologetic kind of responses. Um, I'll tell you one for
And again, I just want to steel man the whole thing. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
I'm kind of anticipating.
yeah. I'll tell you. So I'm going to go back to Egyptus.
Okay.
Okay. This is minutes of the meeting of the Quorum of the 12, uh, 18 August 1900, page 96. A little bit of speculation. This is not revelation, but there are people who would probably take this as authoritative. But I'm
Sure.
gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna cut this down pretty well, I think here. But okay, so it's speculation. There's no problem with speculation, but this quote says President Joseph F. Smith had on a previous occasion related something going to show how the how the full-blooded Negro came through the flood, which had not to his knowledge appeared in our records, and suggested that President Smith be asked to repeat it. Upon being invited to do so, President Joseph F. Smith said that he had been told that the idea originated with Joseph Smith, Jr., but of course he could not vouch for it. It was this idea that the woman named Egyptus was in the family way by a man of her own race before Ham took her to wife, and that Canaan was the result of that illicit intercourse. So the idea is, I don't really actually see how this helps anything, because if you're saying Egyptus is a descendant of Cain already, then I don't know why it matters that um, Ham, like, I don't understand how Ham gets justified taking her to wife anyway. But anyway, the idea here is that Egyptus had like committed adultery like right before the ark left, and some other unnamed man, quote, of her own race, had illicitly impregnated her, and that Canaan was born after that, as a result of that kind of adultery. Here's the problem: a couple of problems with this. One, the script, the New Testament and the Old Testament just say repeatedly, I don't know, half a dozen times or more, that all the number of people on the ark were 8. There were Noah didn't have any grandchildren on the ark. And when they come off the ark, it's Noah and his sons and Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. God says, come off the ark. And God then tells them to multiply and replenish the earth. He gives them the commandment like after they leave the ark. So the flood year was the Noah's flood was a whole year. Actually, and it was, if you look at the numbers, it was actually probably a 13-month year. So, in other words, Egyptus isn't getting impregnated right before they launch, so to speak, and then holding on to a baby for 13 months and then giving birth after they come off. That's not happening. And anyway, I don't see how that would matter too much. And then the other thing is Genesis 9 says, and the sons of Noah that went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan, it says. And these and these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. In other words, they were the progenitors of all the people that came after. That's what the scriptures say. So, there's some speculation. Now, all of the other women, okay, that I'm going to mention, there's kind of similar speculation, and some of it is maybe legitimate. Like you could say, maybe Hagar was the other kind of Egyptian. The text doesn't say that, but we could possibly infer that. Okay. Keturah, one of Abraham's wives. The book of Jasher identifies her as a Canaanite. Says she was a Canaanitish woman. So, but you could say, well, there's two kinds of Canaanites, and that's true. There's like Canaanites who are descendants of Canaan, and Canaanites who are not descendants of Canaan, maybe, but just living in the land of Canaan. They might be called Canaanites too. Okay, like that's fine. There's Asenath, Joseph of Egypt's wife. She was Egyptian as well. Daughter of Potipharah, priest of Heliopolis, priest of On. Okay. She was the mother of tribes Manasseh and Ephraim. Again, you could say something similar. Oh, maybe she was actually there's actually Jewish traditions that she is the Asenath is actually the daughter of Dinah. Dinah being Jacob's daughter, the only daughter that's mentioned anyway. And there's kind of a twisted way that she ends up in Egypt, but basically she gets kind of adopted as an Egyptian. And so you're like, oh, see, she's like an Israelite as well. But the rest of the story is that she's the daughter of Dinah after she was raped by the Canaanite man Shechem.
Okay.
So she's Jacob's descendant, but she's a Canaanite by descent as well from her father Shechem. So it doesn't really solve the problem. We have Judah. He marries a Canaanite wife. She's called Shua. And through her he has 3 sons. Later, Judah impregnates Tamar. Okay, clandestinely. Okay, she's also presumably a Canaanite. Again, there are things that you could say about these women. Oh, maybe they were, they have a different lineage or something. We have, and I'll get to the point about all these kind of apologetic things that you can say in a minute. But in Numbers chapter 12, we have the Cushite wife, or the Ethiopian wife. So Cush is one of the sons of Ham. Okay, right. Whose land was down in Africa there, around Ethiopia. The historian Josephus actually says where she came from. Says when Moses was prince in Egypt, that as prince in Egypt, he would like lead military campaigns, and one of them, Egypt went down to Ethiopia and we're doing battle there, and there was this princess. Her name was Tarbis, and she was Ethiopian, but she saw the bravery and the intelligence of Moses as a commander, and she falls in love with him and actually sides with him. Moses eventually conquers, takes her as a wife, and she goes, presumably goes back to Egypt with him.
Okay.
Then later on, in the book of Jasher, it says Moses flees from Egypt, and he actually flees back down to Ethiopia, and gets married. He does this time. It's not his choice, but he gets married to another woman named Adoniah. This one he actually never consummates. But it's because but the text also says Adoniah like hated him, and basically like she Moses is king of Cush for a while in his exile, and then she basically stages a coup, overthrows him. He flees to Midian, where he meets Jethro, and then marries his next wife, which is Zipporah. And Zipporah, of course, is a Midianite. And I mentioned earlier that Midianites are descended from Keturah, who the book of Jasher says was a Canaanite. So, possibly Zipporah was, of Canaanite descent as well. Then we have Rahab. Okay, this is a long list, right? Rahab, the
Mhm.
the prostitute, and sometimes people say, "Oh, the word is hairdresser," or something like. Have you heard that? She
I
wasn't
have
actually
heard that. Yeah.
she wasn't actually a
Yep.
prostitute. She was just a hairdresser. But she's mentioned in the New Testament 3 times as well, and in the New Testament it uses the Greek word for prostitute. So
Okay.
anyway, yeah, but people say things like, "Oh, yeah, she was in Jericho," but again, she definitely wasn't. She wasn't a Canaanite. She was just living there. We don't have any hard evidence for that necessarily, except we can make inferences, right? Okay, we
Right.
have Ruth, a Moabitess, right? She marries um, Boaz, and she gives birth to
And
Obed, who's the father of Jesse, who's the father of David, who is king of Israel. Okay, and
right.
who's
And
in
who are the Moabs again, real quick, for folks who weren't familiar exactly?
yeah, Moab, uh, the Moabites and the Ammonites. These were the illegitimate children of Lot with his daughters. Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
yeah, and God told them in Deuteronomy chapter 23, an Ammonite or a Moabite. These are the two sons of Lot by his daughters. Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the congregation of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. They shall not enter the congregation of the Lord forever. But yet, Ruth is just marrying right in, and her uh, son, grandson, her great grandson David is just considered Israelite.
The man. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, um, okay. We have Makkah. Okay, this is not a well-known woman, but she was one of the King David's wives. Um, Scripture says she was daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. She was a Philistine woman, and David actually gave birth to his son Absalom and Tamar by her. Um, but so she was not an Israelite; she was a Philistine woman, very clearly. And we have again in section 132 says David's wives and concubines were given unto him of me by the hand of Nathan my servant. And in none of these things did he sin, except in the case of Uriah and his wife. Okay. And actually Uriah and his wife, like Bathsheba, um, Bathsheba is also probably Canaanite. At least Uriah is a Canaanite man. Um, so okay. There are others that could be mentioned, and like I said, there are apologetic answers to a lot of these. A lot of them are kind of ad hoc, like we're just like making up excuses, like special excuses for all of these things.
Right.
um, we might say, oh, these marriages were given before the law was given, so there's no violation, or that these people weren't really Canaanite by descent. They're just living in a Canaanite city, or um, so there's things like that. But I will say that all of these problematic people that I've mentioned, okay,
Mm-hmm.
they all have something in common. They
What's
are
that?
women.
Women? Okay.
All of the problematic people are women. So
Very
why
careful
does that?
what you say next. Like our wives are going to hear this, Josh. Oh, sorry.
Right.
My bad.
So, yeah. Now, I will say, I say problematic in quotes because uh, problematic because I think that the scripture doesn't present these people as problematic. They become problematic because of the way that we have interpreted teachings related to race. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll tell you why I think these women are not a problem, and that is because blessings and cursings and inheritances, um, and rights to the priesthood and tribal affiliations, and all of these things are a matter of lineage and not of race. That's
Okay.
it. Now, saying that is a little confusing because a lot of times we think lineage and race are the same thing. They are related terms, but they are not the same. Would you agree?
Hey, yeah. So I was going to say, let's parse this out here a little bit, right? Let's talk about the difference because this is going to be a big linchpin in the argument here that you're putting forth, right? That lineage and race aren't the same thing. So lineage would be your descent from a certain person, right? Or
That's right.
certain people. Okay. Those people may have different ethnicities, but yet your lineage goes back to your father, to his father,
That's
at
right.
least if you're Israelite or American, right?
That's
We
right.
don't typically deal in matriarchal societies. And so you're going to be, you know, David, son of Dave, and then he's, my dad's Dave, son
Yes.
of, whatever. And your lineage, right?
Yeah.
Likewise, in the church or in Mormonism, you have your patriarchal lineage, right? Where does that go back to? And then we have adoption sealings and those sorts of things. Your race is just what you are as you're born, right? What your parents' ethnicity was. Um,
Right. That's
and
right.
and that may be mixed as you're showing in the Bible here, right?
Yeah. So just going back to Moses and his Ethiopian wife, um, the first Ethiopian wife. There was a second, like I said, but um, now I will say before we get too far that it's very frequently there are injunctions like warnings against marrying outsiders, and I am not speaking against those, but I just have a different interpretation. Okay, so I believe all of those scriptures, but I think that when there's some nuance here, so there's a lot to cover. So don't if you're disagreeing, don't turn it off yet. Don't throw whatever. Don't throw the hammer through the television in frustration. Um, whenever there's a warning against marrying outsiders, it's always almost always accompanied by warnings about spiritual corruption.
Uh-huh.
It's like don't marry outsiders because they will entice you to worship their gods and lead you astray. And we saw this with King Solomon,
Delilah, right?
Delilah. Yeah, there's a bunch of examples. Yeah, right. Um, so so we don't marry outsiders. We never marry outsiders. Okay, that's inadvisable. Uh, but if there is a woman who is from a different family tree who wants to convert, like they convert, they say, like Ruth said, your God is my God, your people, my people. Wherever you go, I go. Okay. Like Ruth is converted to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So spiritually, she is not an outsider. She is an insider.
Okay.
So she is eligible to marry. Um, but if she still said no, like I worship the Moabite gods and I keep the Moabite customs, and I'm planning on giving my first child to Molech or whatever, then and you can marry me or not, then the answer is not. We don't marry her.
Right.
She's not. She is not eligible. Okay. So so going back to like Moses and his first Ethiopian wife, like the record doesn't. Okay. The other thing here is that's
Josh,
interesting is go
I'm
ahead.
I'm sorry. I need to stop right here. I'm probably going to edit this out later, but this should serve as a reminder. Don't marry any woman with blue hair, and we'll just go from there. Um,
Oh yes, that's right. Oh, that's funny. Um, yeah, funny but sad but true.
yeah, the new injunction is on blue hair. I'm calling it right now. Um,
Wow.
all
Okay,
right,
that's good.
go
That's
ahead.
I
Sorry.
think they're going to put that in the next version of the RV
Yes,
scriptures.
yes, that's good. I'll talk to Drew and see if I can't get it put in there
That's
for him.
Dave Sanders, number one, section one.
Right. No blue hairs.
Okay. um, so uh, when now this is a little bit counterintuitive. If someone has kind of studied things, they might be aware that the Jewish way of doing things is not what I'm describing. Like the Jews say, your lineage is from your mother. Are you aware of that?
Yep.
Yeah. I will tell you though that the scriptures do not support that at all.
I
That
was going to
was
say, I think
go
that's
ahead.
a recent invention, right? I mean, because
Yes.
if we look at the origin story, so to speak, it's always the man's name that Israel's most worried about. That the
That's right.
Lord, when the Lord calls out the genealogy, very, very rarely. I think there's one exception in the New Testament when they're going through Christ's lineage. I think everybody else, it's just the male progenitor from which you are flowing that they reference.
And we could talk about that later, but I don't think there is even I don't think there's even an exception in Christ's genealogy. I mean, it does mention women, but it just says a son of this man who was married to.
Okay. And that's what I'm referencing. I had Drew on and we were talking about the nativity story.
Yeah,
And it did call out a, if I'm not mistaken, like a Canaanite woman. Maybe it was
yeah,
forget her name.
yeah.
Always
Tamar,
starts with an R.
Tamar, Bathsheba, um,
Yes.
and Ruth, and Rahab. Like
Yeah.
these are all like Canaanites or
They're
Moabites or
they're the
uh,
problematic ones, as you just put it, right?
yes, exactly. So yeah, so yeah, so I was going to make that point, and you said it beautifully. The genealogies just list the men. I don't. This is kind of to the it's consternation to some modern people because like why are there not women mentioned? And it's because the rights and the blessings and the cursings and the inheritance and the land and the tribal affiliation, that all is from your father
Uh-huh.
and not from your mother. So the baby comes from the mother. That's important. Uh, that's vitally important. But the rest of the inheritance, both spiritual and physical, come from the father. So and that's why. So and even most men are not mentioned, but they list the sons that are necessary to kind of push the story forward, so to speak. So if Moses and his first wife Tarbis had children, we don't have a record of that. But if they had, then they would be mixed race children, but not mixed lineage, because their lineages they're Moses' sons. That is their
Right.
that is their lineage. Their racial composition, is from their mother and their father, but the lineage that they are going to be inheriting everything from is their father, because wives, they connect themselves to their husbands, and then they and their children they inherit with their husband and father. Yeah. So, um,
So can I
Okay.
put this a different way, and you can tell me if this is a fair assessment from where you're coming from on this? You're
Mhm.
thinking this has to do way more with culture than it does with bloodline. Would that be a fair way to look at it, right? You do not want to import a culture that is detrimental to the one that you're living in. In this case, this would be, God saying, don't bring in a different culture that's going to change the religion and change the practices of Israel.
Yeah. And that is repeated. If you look at everywhere where it says not to marry outsiders, like that is the immediate concern, with one exception, which we will get to. That is when the Israelites, when the Israelites enter the land of Canaan, there is a there is a restriction that is genealogically motivated
Okay.
and religiously motivated, but there is a genealogical component, and we'll get to that uh,
Okay.
in a minute.
All
So,
right. I'm jumping ahead. My apologies.
no, you're fine. So, um, yeah, there's many more examples, but these are all kind of pre um, pre Exodus
Hmm.
examples that I gave. Oh well, Rahab was after, but um, so anyway, but when a wife joins, if you have a wife from outside who joins a husband, she is grafted in by marriage. She is
Right.
bara. She is grafted in. So um, let's see. We mentioned I have a do do do. Okay, here's a this is kind of an analogy, but the scriptures use this analogy. The scriptures talk about seeds and soil when
Okay.
plants are grown. so so this is just kind of this is, the scriptures use this metaphor, and it's a nice metaphor to understand, to illustrate what I'm talking about. Um, when when a plant grows, does the kind of plant that it becomes, kind of fruit that it bears, the kind of seeds that it will have, is that does it inherit those things from the seed that it came from, or the soil that the seed was planted in?
Well, just because you plant an apple tree in an orange grove doesn't mean it's going to become an orange, right? So, at some level. Now, I think we have to also understand that, if I'm not mistaken, grapes have a different flavor profile based on different soils, right? Um, isn't there a difference between like a wine you get out of Napa Valley versus one
Yeah,
that you get out of, somewhere else?
that is
So I
true.
would say that it's probably a little bit of both if I was to, get all agrarian on you.
You
Um,
know, agrarian on me. I accept that, and there's definitely wisdom in that nuance there. But by and large,
an
the
apple
kind of
seed is
plant.
going to produce an apple, right?
That's right. Yeah, and when we're using the scriptural metaphor, like the seed is from the man. The man plants the seed in the soil, which is his wife.
Right.
So so as long as the soil is reasonably compatible and can support the growth, then you're going to get the thing that you're going to get what the father provided,
Right. Yep.
and that's what's going to come through. So in a and in a that is lineage. Okay, that's what the scriptures are talking about. That's why the scriptures always talk about um, they always talk about the lineage of the fathers and the blessing of the fathers and so on. And so it's why we talk about the curse of Cain. Like, who did Cain marry?
It's a good question.
It's a good question, but it doesn't matter, is it? Because the curse is from him. Okay,
Okay.
she doesn't contribute to it. Yeah, I mean, maybe she made a bad choice, and she did make a bad choice. Like, she married a murderer, but Cain Cain had children. Um, but people make bad marriage decisions all the time. But okay, so blue hair and all of that. So, um, So this kind of elucidates maybe some other passages in the scriptures. So, for example, in the book of Ezra, chapter 2, verses 59 and 62, I'll read this, says that these people, so this was after the Babylonian captivity. They've been gone for 70 years, so a couple of generations at least. And it says these people returned. It says they could not show their father's house. It says I'll just read it. They could not show their father's house and their seed, whether they were of Israel. But they sought they sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but they were not found. Therefore were they as polluted, put from the priesthood. In other words, they could not show who their father was and their seed, it says. And so they're like, that's that blessing comes through the father's line. It's interesting in our own Doctrine and Covenants, section 85, talking about the inheritances in the future time. Okay, I'm going to read this. This is D&C 85, 7 through 12. I'm going to skip a little bit, but and it shall come to pass that I, the Lord God, will send one mighty and strong to arrange by lot the inheritances of the saints, whose names are found, and the names of their fathers and of their children enrolled in the book of the law of God. Interesting, it does not say the names of their mothers, right? It says the names of the saints and the names of their fathers and the fathers' children. And all they who are not found written in the book of remembrance shall find none inheritance in that day.
Okay.
And they who are of the high priesthood, whose names are not found written in the book of the law, or that are found to have apostatized, or who have been cut off from the church, as well as the lesser priesthood or the members, in that day shall not find an inheritance among the saints of the Most High. Therefore, it shall be done unto them as unto the children of the priest, as it will be found recorded in the 2nd chapter and 61st and 62nd verses of Ezra.
Okay.
So same thing, if you can't show your lineage that you are connected to the tree, in that day when it comes time to assign lots and inheritances to the saints, then it's going to be like it was in the days of Ezra.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
So, okay. So who's Cain's wife? Doesn't matter. Okay. And then it goes on down, and then well, it goes to Cain. His son is Enoch. It doesn't mention who his wife was. Doesn't matter. His son was Irad. Doesn't matter who his wife was. Mahujael, Methusael, Lamech. Okay, we don't even have any women mentioned until Lamech, and then we do have his wives mentioned because there's some dialogue that happened. But someone might object, right? Doesn't it say that the curse was preserved because of Egyptus? Is that it in your mind? Like the curse was preserved in the land through the flood because of Egyptus?
I think Brigham said something to that effect, didn't he? that was allowed to carry through, so to speak. I don't have the exact quote memorized off the top of my head, but I do recall a quote like that.
Yeah. So, okay. And actually, let's see. Okay. I don't have the reference. Let me you can look it up. I think it's in the LDS, it's either in the chapter heading or the footnotes. Like it mentions the curse being preserved because of Egyptus. But if you actually read what the scriptures say, they don't say that. What they say, this is going into the book of Abraham.
Which chapter?
Let's see. I'm going to grab it here too. Abraham chapter 1.
A few months back, Drew Briney released a set of scriptures called the Restored Version, or RV for short. Since that time, quite a few copies have been sent out to the delight of those who made those purchases. Well, despite the number of purchases, Drew and his team want to get a copy into the hands of as many people as possible. Because of this, there's a limited time offer for a discount. But before we get to that, I want to let you know again what all you're going to get in this set of scriptures. In the Book of Mormon, you're going to find dozens of footnotes that show Joseph Smith's final edits. In the Doctrine and Covenants, there are over 1,500 footnotes showing Joseph Smith's revisions, as well as some context that's giving to help you, the reader, understand exactly what's going on as the revelation was given. In the restored version, you will see that the lectures on faith have been put back into the scriptures. Now, the format of the text has been restored back to its original paragraph form, but despite this, Drew was able to keep the Orson Hyde versification, which allows for a smooth, easy read, as well as the ability to do deep dives. Now, in addition to all of this, there's 125 uncanonized revelations from early Mormon leaders, including Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, and more. Now comes the good part to save you, the listener, some money. From now until this printing's run is out, just for being a Mormon Renegade podcast listener, when you purchase your copy of the restored version, at checkout, simply put in the discount code RENEGADE in all caps, and you're going to get a 10% discount. Now, I don't have to tell you how important it is that if we want to get back to what the Lord had originally intended through the restoration, we have to get the scriptures back to what Joseph had said they were. This restored version of the scriptures does just that. Again, all you got to do is head over to restoredversion.com, select whatever color you would like, and at checkout, type in the promo code RENEGADE in all caps, and you get that 10% off. So whether you're buying for yourself or a loved one, this will be a purchase that stands the test of time, that allows you to deepen your faith, not only in our Lord Jesus Christ, but also in the restoration. Now, let's get back to the show.
Okay. Sorry. So
no, you're good.
In my distracted search, I cannot find, but I think it's fairly well known that there's a belief that the curse of Cain came through the flood because of Egyptus. Yeah, would you agree?
Yep.
Okay. But in Abraham chapter 1, verse 21 through 24, it says, now this king of Egypt was a descendant from the loins of Ham, and was a partaker of the blood of the Canaanites by birth. And from this descent sprang all the Egyptians, and thus the blood of the Canaanites was preserved in the land. It goes on, this woman discovered the land, it was underwater. Afterwards settled her sons in it, and thus from Ham sprang the race which preserved the curse in the land. So it actually doesn't say anywhere that the curse, whatever curse is being talked about, that the curse came from Egyptus. It actually says repeatedly that it came from Ham.
Hey, this is interesting because it's two different curses then, right? Because the assumption is it's the curse of Cain that's being preserved, but it's not saying that. It's saying it's the curse of Ham. And Ham's offense is different than what Cain's was. And we don't necessarily have a mark that's handed out on Ham, just that he was cursed. Is that correct?
Correct.
My understanding is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So now the whole story of the curse of Ham and the curse of Canaan is kind of a strange story, because Ham also has other children, Cush, Put, and Mizraim, or Mizraim, and apparently, Ham is the one that commits the offense, but then in the story, Canaan is the one that gets cursed. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It actually doesn't. It's kind of strange, and so there's different ideas about what the curse was, and this is kind of pertinent, so I'm just going to briefly go over that. But in the book of Moses, again, chapter 8, verse 12, it says, Noah was 450 years old and begat Japheth. And 42 years afterward, he begat Shem, of her who was the mother of Japheth. So it points out that they are from the same mother. And then it says, and when he was 500 years old, he begat Ham, but does not specify, again, of the same mother, which, um, I think it's saying fairly clearly that Shem and Japheth were from a different mother than Ham was.
Okay.
Okay. And then the book of Jasher actually says this as well. This is Jasher chapter 5. Says, starting verse 16, and Noah was 498 years old when he took Naamah for a wife, and Naamah conceived and bare a son and called his name Japheth. Okay, and then she again conceived and bare a son called his name Shem. And then it says, and Noah was 502 years old when Naamah bare Shem. The boys, those two grew up in the ways of the Lord, and all that Methuselah and Noah their father taught them. And then if you go on to read the book of Jasher, like, it doesn't mention Ham for a while later, and then Ham comes along. So I think again, it's explicitly, like, the text is going out of its way to say that Shem and Japheth were from the same mother. Okay. So why is that important? Because the crime that Ham commits says that he, quote, saw the nakedness of his father. You familiar with the story enough to recognize that phrase?
Yep.
Okay, so I think that this phrase, saw the nakedness of his father, is has the double meaning. Okay, so one meaning that's especially insightful to Latter-day Saints is that Ham took the priesthood robe, the garment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was given to Adam. And there's very interesting story about how that was passed down, and eventually becomes the coat of many colors.
Right,
Given
I've heard
to
this.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't explain all of that story, but that is definitely one, I think, intended meaning. The other intended meaning is, if you go to Leviticus, it actually defines this term. Leviticus chapter 18 and chapter 20 also. I'll read verse 20, verse 11, or chapter 20, verse 11. The man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
How is this?
Okay, I'm talking to Dave. So what I am submitting is that Canaan was actually not the son of Egyptus at all, but he was the son of Ham. And how is that? Because Ham raped Noah's wife. While Noah was drunk, Ham took advantage of the situation, raped his father's wife, who is not his mother. Right? So it's
right. I see it. Yep.
Okay, who's at least probably not his mother. Okay, and as part of the deal, also took the garment. So he's kind of like asserting authority over his father in these two ways.
Gotcha. Yep.
And so gets cursed. Now, this is why. See, the other Ham's other sons, Cush and Put and Mitzrayim, they were not the result of this incestuous rape and theft, usurpation, and so Ham becomes cursed at this point, and, like, basically gets he gets kicked out of the will, so to speak, and so his children are going to be kicked out of the will as well, as long as they just hang on to Ham as their father and don't get grafted back in. Like, that branch is cut off. This is why Canaan is cursed, but not Cush and Mitzrayim.
That would make sense, right? So this starts to sound a lot more political, dynastically speaking, right? In that you have a son who is trying to essentially do a coup against his father by taking the authority. And in
Right.
doing so, the Lord very well can't allow the priesthood to fall into those hands. And
No
so
way.
that's where the curse as to the priesthood comes in. Because it is interesting too, right? That the scripture does say cursed as to the right of the priesthood, right?
Right.
It lists it very clearly here. But again, to your point, and I think it's a great point, is that it's not the same curse, the original curse from Cain and Abel. This is a different curse that Ham has incurred. And the reason the priesthood can't go to his son is you can't very well allow that authority to fall into enemy hands, so to speak. Is that a fair assessment here?
Yeah, I would say so. Um, and that's not to say the scriptures don't actually say anything about the race of Egyptus or her lineage. Um, but again, it doesn't matter. Like we read before, Ham married before this incident after the flood. Ham was righteous. Ham walked with God. Egyptus was apparently righteous too. They were invited on the ark. Okay.
Yep.
And the scriptures do not say that the curse came because of Egyptus. They explicitly say it came because of Ham through
Yeah.
Canaan. Yeah, that is what. So now, it is actually, I think, commonly confused. The Canaanites and Abel's brother Cain. So Canaanite does not mean descended from Cain.
Right.
Canaanite means descended from Canaan, Ham's son, Ham's illegitimate son. So I just want to kind of disabuse people's minds of that kind of common misconception. Okay, so now Canaanites, in the pre-Exodus time, there's a bunch of marriages. We have Abraham with Keturah possibly, and like the Book of Jasher and the Book of Jubilees, and Genesis too. Like Genesis mentions Judah and Simeon marrying Canaanite women. And then in the Book of Jasher, I think there's several more of the brothers that explicitly marry Canaanite women. And yes, it may not be advisable, especially if they're not converted. But there isn't quite the all-out prohibition that there is later on. Later on, when they're entering the promised land, the God tells Moses, "Do not intermarry with them. Not in any way. You cannot. Not just don't give your daughters to them, but also don't
Don't let your
you
sons
shouldn't
marry
marry
them.
either way. Yeah, you shouldn't marry their daughters, and you shouldn't give your daughters to their sons either. And it's like a total prohibition. I will say, let me go back a little bit. It is to English is not a gendered language the way that Hebrew is. So in English we say someone is German or Italian or American, and there's no assignment of gender to that. Like Germans are male or female. But in Hebrew, there isn't terms like that for Moabites. Moabites are not male or female. Moabites are males and Moavites are females. But
Mhm.
a lot of times it was like this was the understanding, is that in ancient times, and this is why all the problematic people are women, is because it was understood that the prohibitions on marrying Moabites is talking about Moabite males. Like you are not supposed to give your daughters to a Moabite man. But if you are an Israelite man, you could take a Moabite woman to wife, assuming that she is willing to convert. Okay, and so that is why there's no problem with Ruth. That is why there's no problem with any of them. Uh, so, but it's because they would leave their father's house and be grafted into their husband's house, and then inherit, and they and their children would inherit with him. The other way around, if your daughters go and marry um, outside men, then they basically cut themselves off from Israel, because they get cut from the tree and grafted into another tree, and they will have different blessings and different lands to inherit, and possibly curses to inherit as well.
Sure.
So okay, let's see. So okay, in the when they are entering the promised land, well, first they go there, and it's interesting because Abraham was there in the promised land before he went to Egypt. He came back. Jacob and his family were living in the promised land. Canaanites are everywhere. But then they go down into Egypt, and they're there for a couple of centuries. And when they come back, then the spies go out, and they don't want to go into the promised land. Do you remember why?
Yeah, because if I recall the story, Moses essentially sends spies out, right? Go check out the land. And they go and they're like, "You're right, it's flowing with milk and honey, and look at all these cool fruit we found. I mean, this is fantastic, except for there's giants in the land, and they're gonna completely trash us, and we're not gonna have any opportunity." And it's out of this that the Lord's almost done with them, because they try to stone Moses and Aaron. And
Yeah, right.
like, it was a big thing.
So now, before, when Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were hanging out in the promised land, before the children of Egypt went down to Egypt, there was no giants mentioned. But in the couple of centuries while they were gone, then giants show up and colonize the land, and the giants um, are Canaanites. Okay, now they are the Nephilim, the Anakim, the children of Anak, as it says, the Rephaim, and the Emims and the Zomims. Um, this is like all the descriptions for giants, and so this is kind of controversial where these giants come from, but or even whether there were actual giants. But I am a believer in the fallen angels described in Genesis chapter 6, described in a lot more detail in the first book of Enoch, where fallen angels come and they take mortal women as wives, and the result of this kind of these illicitly produced offspring are the giants. And the giants are wicked through and through. They oppress the rest of humanity, and they, teach forbidden things to humanity. And so uh, I believe that the giants that showed up, like Jacob, Jacob goes down to Egypt with all of his people, and I think Satan knows that by the time they're ready to come out of Egypt, they're coming back to inherit the promised land and to establish the kingdom and all the things that are going to eventually lead to Messiah. And that while they were gone, that Satan decides he's going to basically plant tares, okay, in the field, so to speak. And the angels, the first time in Genesis 6, when the washers fall, and they produce the giants, that is at least a part of the reason for the flood, is to cleanse the earth from that lineage, as well as the corruption, the moral corruption that they were bringing. And sometime, so the giants are killed, and Their spirits are imprisoned and all that. But then at some point there is more giants that get planted in the promised land. And the Bible doesn't actually say where they came from. And so there's a bit of a mystery and some controversy about that. One idea that you'll read about sometimes is that there was a single giant, Og, the king of Bashan, I think. Anyway, he gets killed by the Israelites later on, but that Og was like hung on to the outside of Noah's Ark while it was floating, and he like escaped. So that's one idea. That's kind of Jewish legends. Another idea is that there was a second incursion, like more angels fell, and we don't have record of that necessarily, but that there was a second incursion. However the case may be, the Canaanites or the land of Canaan, I should say, has become infested with giants. And I believe that these giants are the same, like of the same source, however that may be, of the same source as the ancient giants, pre-Diluvian giants. So, I believe that and I think there's a lot of evidence for this. I believe that the prohibition on intermarrying with the Canaanites has to do with this contaminated bloodline from Watchers, from fallen angels.
Interesting.
And that is the purpose of the strict, like, it doesn't matter. There's no conversion is possible. It's a strict prohibition. It's interesting that the instructions to the Israelites say that in the land of Canaan, there's to be no intermarriage. But it says if you go outside of the land of Canaan, so if you go over to Egypt, okay, Egyptians and Ethiopians, or you go elsewhere outside of Canaan, then it says you can marry the people, even if they are descendants of Ham. So, like, the Ethiopian woman and the Egyptian women, and they have Hamitic bloodlines, but they're not necessarily through Canaan, which is the child that Ham had, like, after the curse was placed upon him.
Right. Again, this is like a third cursing, so to speak, right? You got the one with Cain and Abel, then you have the curse of Ham, and now there's this other thing with this mixed bloodline from the Watchers and mortals, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it is interesting. It's compelling that the Lord says it for that land, right? Just this land. You go to Egypt, you're good. You go to wherever, you're good, but not here.
Yeah, with the understanding, with the caveat that we don't marry idolaters. We can marry foreign women, but only if they are
right, willing to convert. Yeah.
So it's interesting when, of course, the book of Joshua, a lot of the book of Joshua is about the conquest of Canaan. But Joshua chapter 11 actually says, hold on just a second. Grab a Bible here. So Joshua has 24 chapters. Okay. But the war is over in Joshua chapter 11.
Okay.
And it actually says why the war is over, or essentially over. It's over enough that they can stop going out to battle and start settling down. And it says, right at the end of Joshua chapter 11, starting verse 21.
You want me to read that?
Yeah, if you have that.
Yep. 11:21 of the book of Joshua, and at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakim from the mountains of Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. There was one of the Anakim.
None. Sorry, none. There was
Oh,
none of
sorry.
the
Yep, I messed that up. Sorry. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, in Ashdod, and there remained. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land rested from war. Okay.
Okay. So Joshua says the war was over when he'd wiped out the Anakim, which are the giants. And he says there's some that remained in Gath. That's where Goliath was from. So there was.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
Because I'm about to make this real timely, I think.
Okay.
Is Gaza here the same place Gaza is in Israel
The very
today?
same. Yeah.
I find that interesting because that's the other place where, right? I mean, that's the other place where the Lord says, where Joshua says, we defeated them all except in these two places.
Yeah.
And Gaza.
Yeah. 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 A little bit of foreshadowing, maybe. It's actually
Sorry.
interesting.
My bad.
No, you're fine. There's not complaining, arguing about whose land is the promised land there, right? And of course, Israelis, the Jews, say, this land was given to us. We've been there for a long time. The Palestinians, though, recently have started claiming, no, we are Canaanites. We were here before. It's like, I don't know if you want to be claiming. I don't know if you want to be telling the Jews that we are Canaanites. This land is ours. Not probably a good choice, but
you may want to read that book once more before you make that assertion. Wow.
Anyway, the
interesting.
amazing thing about this passage is it says once the giants were wiped out, then the war was over and they started to settle and receive their inheritances. And it doesn't say that all the inhabitants, only that the giants that were living there were wiped out, and then we could settle down. And so I think that the strict prohibition on intermarriage was because of the giant blood. Okay. So that had contaminated the land, and once Joshua had removed that contamination, and they were wicked, they were not human. This was not in the strictest sense. They weren't human anyway. They were half breeds of some kind. Then the war was over, and then everything was back to the previous instructions, which were don't marry men from foreign countries, because if you do, you're going to inherit with them. Because inheritance comes from your father and your husband. So if you marry out, then you're inheriting someone else's land and someone else's blessings and promises. But if you do want to bring a woman in, they will inherit from their husband, but they have to be converted. Now, men can convert too, okay? And there are examples of that. Although, like I said, mostly the problematic people are women, but there are a few men who are Canaanites living among the house of Israel. One of them is Uriah, Bathsheba's husband. He was faithful, and it mentions he was Canaanite. We also have Caleb, one of the spies. He was a Kenizzite, which is one of the tribes living in the land, back when Abraham was there. Kenizzites were there. But Joshua, a lot of people end up in Egypt during the famine, and Caleb's family ends up there as well, and he apparently converts and is adopted into the tribe of Judah. Anyway, there's controversy about some of these things, but so men can convert, but they need to be grafted in. So if you're a man who's not part of Israel by birth, then the way to get in is to impress some Israelite man who will be willing to adopt you as a son, and then you'll receive, inheritance from your father in that way. So that is what I think is happening with the race and the priesthood issue in the church. It is interesting. There are, and not to go into extreme detail here, but there were several black men who were ordained to the priesthood. And then things changed. Things got cracked down. There was a crackdown, as you know. But one possible explanation is Joseph Smith, who was involved in at least some of those ordinations. Joseph Smith had not received fullness of the revelations, and so he kind of committed an error in ignorance. That's one possible. My explanation is that Joseph Smith did not commit those in ignorance, but that those men were had European fathers and African mothers, and so they were, and I am of the opinion that the scattered tribes, were scattered to the European lands, and that's another big topic, I guess. But there's a lot of interesting evidence for that. So I think that those men were partaking of their father's lineage and not their mother's lineage, and so there was no actual problem there.
Have you done any research to see if that is actually the case, that they had European fathers?
Yeah, several. It's hard to find some information on some of them, but at least several of them did. Yeah, Elijah Abels, he's the most famous. Yeah, his father, I don't have it in front of me.
Sure.
Yeah, but his father was European, and his grandfather too, if I remember right.
Okay.
So, but it was not an uncommon thing for, white masters to to impregnate their female slaves. Good, bad, or indifferent, that did happen. And so, and I'm not excusing that or anything, but but I think that the lineage, that it's not the race that's important, it's the lineage that's important. And so sometimes there's questions that get asked, if there's a cursed race and a blessed race, what happens if they intermarry? Right? Does the blessing prevail or the cursing prevail? Have you've heard that kind of?
Yep. If one drop can curse, can one drop redeem?
Yeah. Right. Well, I think it's just that's not the question, the right question, because it doesn't have to do with race, it has to do with lineage. So it depends on who the father is. If the father is an Israelite man, then the children are Israelite, and they will inherit from their father, and they'll inherit both the physical and the spiritual blessings that go along with that. And if it's the other way around, and the mother is Israelite and the father is some sort of foreigner, then she and her children inherit from him, whatever that may be: blessings, cursings, land, privileges, whatever.
Interesting. Well, it's a compelling case for sure. But I do have some questions if you're up for.
Okay, yeah.
Let's real quick go to fourth Nephi and look at verse 17.
Okay.
Because I thought about this when I had first read this revelation a few years back.
Yeah.
So starting in 17. So this is after the Savior's come, and this is right before everything goes bad again. Right now, everything's still hunky-dory. But starting in 17, it says, there were no robbers, no murderers, neither were there Lamanites or any manner of ites, but they were one in one, the children of Christ and heirs to the kingdom of God. And then I think we can stop just right there.
Okay.
So at the end, there seems of the Book of Mormon there towards the end, I should say, there's this idea that, hey, all the ites got scattered. Now they come back, but my question is, when they come back this time, are they separating by bloodline again, right? Because if I look at 17 and they're like, okay, there's no manner of ites, they were, all numbered together, I'm imagining that there's probably some marriages going on there too, right? Between
Yeah.
traditional Lamanites and traditional Nephites. And so if that's the case, then the split that would happen again, that would recreate the Lamanites and Nephites, I would expect would be more of a political split, unless I'm looking at it wrong. So I would ask you, where am I looking at this wrong?
Well, I think you're right that there's, yeah, a couple of things. I mean, when it says they're all one family, apparently, right? I think that we're talking about, intermarriage and adoptions happening to the point where there aren't, where everyone is just blessed, yeah, and has a right, and are heirs, right? That term heir is a familial term, right? It
Yep.
says they're heirs. What does it say? Heirs to the kingdom of God. Okay, that's a spiritual thing, but I think they were probably heirs to the physical land as well, and all that goes along with that. It's interesting in the Old Testament, a lot of times when the punishment for crimes is, one of the punishments is that they will be, quote, cut off from their people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think this is kind of roughly equivalent to excommunication, except that I think it's not. Excommunication is like from the church, and usually we don't think of the church in familial terms, although I think properly it's meant to be understood that way. But being cut off from your people, I think, means like cut out of the will, basically. Like
Right.
you don't inherit from your father anymore. You need to go find a different land and different people to be a part of.
Okay.
Until you repent, maybe. Prodigal son can come back. So that's my answer there. I don't know if I answered that fully, but that's my thoughts anyway. I think you know, I guess let me complete the thought. When they split into ites again, I think it's this process is that there begins to be wickedness and then division, and people get cut out of the will. People sit, and a lot of times I think separations like that are totally voluntary. They're like, I do not want to be. Don't call me your son anymore. Don't call
Right.
me your daughter. I don't claim this family. I'm out. We see that happening. Tragedies just in families nowadays. So let me go back to, because this you brought it back to the first Revelation, Joseph Smith 4. I think this is the reason why the Revelation says to these men who have kind of reestablished covenant and reestablished God's house, so to speak, to bring in women by marriage, and not the other way around. It doesn't say give your daughters to the Lamanite men, because
So
that
it's
would
back to
be,
culture. It's back to culture again.
yeah. Now if they join the church and were adopted in, then they're saints,
Okay. All right.
But
No, that would make sense. And then to kind of go, I'm sorry, did you feel
so
like you made your point on that?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. And then my other point is in the terminology, right? So we see this phrase once before, back in Second Nephi. I can't remember where, the white and delightsome thing. But when Joseph goes back, he ends up changing the word white to pure. And I'm wondering if the same thing isn't going on here, and which would seem to make sense with more of this cultural thing than a racial thing.
In a
Is that
racial
making sense?
Yeah.
Because again, back to Fourth Nephi, right? And I understand why Drew left it the way it is, because it's the only copy we got, right? So there's nothing that you can hang your hat on to reasonably change it. But I do wonder, given that, as we just talked, Fourth Nephi is a political thing, right? Where there's ites that come back again, more of a familiar thing, you're X'd, or you can look at it as a political split or whatever. Yeah. And then other than that, I think that's all I have. Those were a few of the questions that came up at as we went through this. Other than that, I feel like the rest of it you've nailed down pretty well.
So yeah, so I do think there are lineages that are excluded from the priesthood.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any, and that has always been the case. But the restrictions are lineal and not racial. That seems to be, to me, what the scriptures are saying in many different ways. And to me, this also just simultaneously resolves many problems about the problematic people, both in scriptures and also problematic people in early church history. Like for me, it just kind of, this principle, if you apply it, just kind of clears up all of these things
Well,
simultaneously.
and that would also harmonize really well with Exodus 12:38, right? Because when the children of Israel are leaving Israel,
Right.
it calls them a mixed multitude, right?
It is true.
And at the time, you have to look at Egypt and understand it is the capital of the world, right? Of the known world. And
That is correct. So
they weren't taking slaves just from the children of Israel, right? We know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. They're grabbing them wherever they can. And apparently some of these folks come out with them. And so again, that harmonizes that, I think, pretty well, right? These are probably people who made that integration, were adopted in, so to speak, and then were able to leave or would do it. Now, there are some downstream effects here that I want to get your opinion on. So let's follow this out here. Let's say a a guy who's an Israelite marries a woman who's not. What's the condition of her son that's born out of that marriage before God? Does he have right to the gospel?
Yeah. I would say his the rights are whatever rights the father has get
Yeah.
passed along. Assuming things are done, assuming the father's righteous or whatever, it hasn't cut himself off, which is a possibility. But assuming that he himself is connected to the tree, in good standing, so to speak, then his children are going to be as well. That's that's my position.
Now, like, because there was that one group that said, yeah, wait, 10 generations, right? So do you have any
Okay.
sort of feeling that way, right? Do you have to wait a certain allotment of time or anything like that? What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, that's a good question. My thoughts on that are that 10 generations was a prohibition on accepting male converts from those lineages for 10 generations from the time that the commandment was given. So this time, that is like an explicitly time limited commandment. And I think that was because of the serious problems that existed with those other cultures and their idolatries at that time. So I think that has expired. And so when Ruth marries Boaz, that is like within that 10 generation time. She is, I don't know how many generations. She's 5 or 6 generations away from the when they entered the promised land, something like that. So, but it was not a problem because she's female and she can be grafted in. But I think that they were saying we don't want until we clean out some of the idolatry and things.
Gotcha.
Then males are not allowed to join. But but I think that has I think that has expired. So
Okay. All right. Well, dude, that's just about all the questions I had. Do you have anything else you want to share? Did we cover everything you wanted to?
no, that's everything probably. I mean, there's many more details that could be talked about, but we've already been here for 2.5 hours or something. No need to make it an embarrassingly long podcast like we have on times past. So
Come on, dude. I came into this one regulating the amount of fluids I took in. I've done all these. No, I'm just kidding. You're good. Don't feel bad about those at all, dude. Those were some good episodes. You should wear that like a badge of honor. That
yeah,
is
well, I
not
agree.
be embarrassed about, bro.
I don't disagree, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. That's my
Dude,
view.
that was fascinating. That was a good dive. I know I learned quite a bit. I'm anxious to get this one out there. So
Okay.
I'm very no, this will be out probably about 2 weeks about not next weekend, not next Saturday, but the Saturday after that. So about 2 weeks.
Okay. That sounds good.
Is when that one will come out. So, well, dude, I appreciate it, man.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We'll get with you soon. Bye.
Yep, hang out just 5 minutes.
Okay.